Welcome back. You would have... Shall I start again? Welcome back. You would have seen here on Newzroom Afrika yesterday the huge debate in Parliament about government's decision to withdraw our diplomats from Israel, partly to show our condemnation of Israel's action in Gaza. Of course, a huge variety of views in our country around this. Professor Christopher Isike is a professor of African politics and international relations in the Department of Political Science at the University of Pretoria. Professor Isike, good afternoon to you. There's so much conversation around this. There's a lot of public sort of demands, a lot of public pressure in our society for our country to act against Israel. Is this the right kind of action to remove our diplomats? Does it send a strong signal?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yes, it does. When an ambassador, when a country recalls, its ambassador, it sends a very clear and powerful diplomatic message to the host country that, and of course, even the international community. Sometimes this specific message may vary depending on the circumstance and the reason behind the withdrawal. But the act of recalling an ambassador is a significant diplomatic move that communicates strong disapproval, and it also kind of signals a breakdown in relations between countries that are involved. So in the case of South Africa, it is expressing serious discontent with Israel's bombing of Gaza, which has termed a genocide. However, we must know that it's not just the ambassador that has been recalled for consultation, as the statement by the cabinet indicated. It's the entire mission in Tel Aviv that has been called, and this leaves room for questions around what pathways there are to engaging with Israel on the issue.
I mean, could there have been other things we could have done, or other things we could have said, or measures we could have taken, and still left sort of official diplomatic lines of communication open?
Well, the lines are still open because we can do a demand to the Israeli ambassador, which South Africa is already making preparations to ask to come and explain, so that South Africa can also explain its position. It could have also left the entire mission in place while recalling only the ambassador for consultation, but recalling the entire mission, effectively closes any opportunity for them to also get on ground indication from Israel about what Israel is really intending, what the end game is. That has been foreclosed now by the mission leaving Israel completely.
Professor, there are other ways of looking at all of this, of course. The other big conflict underway at the moment is with Russia and Ukraine. And we've kept diplomatic relations with them very much open, both Russia and Ukraine. In fact, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, was in town earlier this week. I think you actually saw him yourself. Is there an inconsistency with what we've done with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and what we've done in the Middle East? And let me just say, Professor Isike, I mean, it's one thing for a journalist to demand consistency. I don't like to engage in whataboutism, and I'm probably guilty of engaging in whataboutism. What about Ukraine and Russia? But should we expect international relations to be consistent, or is that just not how the world works?
Well, in international relations, they always say there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, just permanent interests. The question is whether those interests align with, the prescripts of your foreign policy or international law, as the case may be. There are parallels that can be drawn, between what's going on now in Ukraine and what's happening as well in the Gaza. The difference is in the case of Ukraine, South Africa initially started out with giving the impression that they were in support of Russia, and they used old friendship ties as a basis for that support. But then they forgot that Ukraine was a big part of that old friendship ties. And this is now being corrected, like you referenced just now. We had the foreign minister of Ukraine visiting South Africa. Before then, when President Ramaphosa visited Ukraine with the African peace envoy and Russia eventually, there were talks between Zelensky and Ramaphosa that tended to normalize relations between the two countries in terms of how it should be, and the kind of two-sidedness that South Africa should be looking to engage in. And so that two-sidedness has been reflected since the peace mission in June, July. But not condemning Russia openly in terms of what Russia did or has been doing in Ukraine in terms of killing women and children and indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas sometimes is the same thing that's happening around in the Middle East, in Gaza Strip. But it has found its voice in criticizing that as it should. And we must also commend South Africa for not just leaving the criticism at the doorsteps of Israel, but also criticizing Hamas in the same vein. And this is what a typical middle power country or soft power country in a continent like Africa, in Africa and the world, and even the United States globally should be doing, condemning both and putting structures in place to enable a humanitarian ceasefire, a pause in the conflict, and for talks to normalize things. But I agree with you that there's been inconsistency, but one aspect of that inconsistency is the consistency in South Africa from 1994 being very clear about its support for the Palestinian cause.
Mm. You mentioned the issue of permanent interests, not always permanent friends, but permanent interests a moment ago. And I would imagine a lot of business people would say that market-free access to the United States through the African Growth and Opportunity Act, the American AGOA Act, is a permanent interest or a semi-permanent interest. Partially by design, of course. The Americans have created it so they can use it as a lever over us. Chris Coons, he's a Democrat in the United States. He's a senator. He wants us out of AGOA. Both Ukraine and Israel are close allies of the United States. Our actions around those conflicts, could that affect what happens with AGOA or not really?
Well, I think they could, because, initially we thought that South Africa is out of the woods with the successful hosting of the AGOA. But with this recent proposal by an influential senator as Chris Coons, and the bill that he has proposed to renew the AGOA for 16 years, that would also require an immediate, out-of-circle review of South Africa's eligibility. These are red flags, because out-of-circle reviews are done when special circumstances arise in between the normal annual reviews of all AGOA beneficiaries. And it seems to me that Senator Coons is using that window to get the U.S. Senate to take course corrective action, which has also been called for, by the way, by a senior Republican Senator, Jim Ridge, who is also questioning South Africa's eligibility. Of course, they did this a few months ago because of South Africa's warm ties with Russia. But, I think that they are also now adding, like you are trying to imply, this question of South Africa's position on Hamas, Minister Pando's call to the Hamas leader and her recent visit to Iran, and of course, this current withdrawal of its mission from Israel. The issue there is that they could say, look, one of the requirements for eligibility is that no country who is eligible should act against U.S. interests. So the question is not taking sides with the U.S. For Israel. Will that be constituted as against U.S. interests, especially with the way that South Africa is played its hand in this particular conflict? That could be so. However, let's not also forget that the United States also benefits from the AGOA arrangement itself. So they benefit Africa, they benefit South Africa. South Africa is one of the biggest beneficiaries. But the United States needs AGOA as a sort of counter to China, what China is doing in the continent. So it's not all benefits only for Africa or South Africa in this instance. Like Minister Patel said, the Africa value proposition is very compelling, because it enables the U.S. to counter the challenge to China as a competition for its own interest in the continent. So it's a two-way street. It's not automatic that because there's going to be a review, that means South Africa would get out of AGOA.
So Africa is a permanent interest of the U.S. as well, to put it another way. Professor Christopher Isike,
yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor of African Politics and International Relations at the University of Pretoria.